my overnight success as a real estate investor, I mean, the past year has been unbelievable for me. Guess what? I did it 10 years as a hobby to learn this whole thing, and then I grinded it out making like no money for like 5 years, right? Before now I'm finally seeing some nice successes, right?
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hennche. Hello everybody. Today we have Matt Picheny on the podcast. He's a multifamily real estate syndicator. He also used to be an actor on Broadway, and he's an investor in Broadway shows. So he clearly has a zest for life and an interesting story to share with us. Welcome, Matt.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So I'm very excited to speak to you because we've known each other for years. So I've seen your development in the multifamily real estate from like a slight distance, and it's just been momentous to say the least. You just released your first book, and I really want to dive into how you went from Broadway to real estate and what it takes to be a successful real estate syndicator. So maybe you can give us a little bit of an intro in how where did you start in your journey in life, and then we go into how we go to real estate.
Sure. Well, it is great to be talking with you because we've become friends over the past 5 years or so, I guess 4 or 5 years. And I think you're right. I mean, it was sort of at a distance. I think when you and I first met, I think I already had my first deal. I think I'd already syndicated my first deal, but that was just my first one. And there's been a lot of, learning and growth and exploration through that period. And over time, I have gotten to, be the point where we've gone out and had dinner together and things like that. So it's been nice to develop a relationship with you. My life journey started in Florida. We're actually recording this on my birthday. And so
happy birthday.
Thanks. On this day, 49 years ago, I was born in Orlando, Florida. And so I grew up in Orlando, Florida. My father, interestingly enough, was a real estate broker and agent for a few years. When I was really young, I do remember that. But he ended up getting involved in the food service industry, so something that's near and dear to your heart. Although the things that he did were not at the level of, I would say the quality of what you do, right? Because you prepare nice, wholesome meals, and you're also very, I think, thoughtful about like where the food is coming from and things like that. My father sold hot dogs. Okay, I mean, like that's essentially what he did. He had a commissary in Orlando, Florida, and he actually provided hot dogs and carts and all kinds of things like that to food vendors, but like for like food trucks and food carts. And he had a facility where they would, they could go get ice and buy the different products. Lots of soda was sold there, things of that nature. So not necessarily healthy things, but still food, right? And my mother also was a bit of an entrepreneur, where she started off, where she was actually, I was born, and then my sister shortly thereafter, and so my mom was stay at home for the first few years, and then once my sister was in preschool, my mother started working part-time, and she worked as an office manager. I think she actually was initially a bookkeeper, and then got into sort of office management. And then one of the partners at one of the firms she ended up working at went off on his own, and asked her if she would be his office manager. And she said, "No, but I will be your business partner." And they ended up having, and so they ended up having a really nice, very niche business in the Orlando area. They were roof consultants. So they would work as sort of the intermediary between an owner of a building and a roofing company. And they would work for things like the post office or the public schools. They actually were involved in the re-roofing of Main Street, USA at the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. So they had they had some cool projects. So So I grew up in a family of people who were entrepreneurs. I would not say that. I don't think that we were wealthy. We were, middle class or maybe lower middle class. I mean, my parents did have their own jobs, but they were struggling. I think, and I started to fall in love with theater. I mean, I was involved in the theater I think I was in a preschool play. I was told that I was a bird in a preschool play, and that I was fantastic as the bird, flapping my wings, running across the stage. And I guess that's
Did you have any
where
lines,
it all started.
or you were just flopping?
I think I just, maybe did a few caw, caw kind of things. I have no idea, no recollection. I do remember in a little community theater setting doing like really young children's plays. I remember we did I was the king in Cinderella. And I remember I was the lion in The Wizard of Oz. But, where I really got into the acting thing was my 5th grade play. I was Bert in Mary Poppins. That's the part that Dick Van Dyke plays in the movie, right? And so I really did get really good reviews. People loved it and raved about it. And I loved it and was really into it. And that's when I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is awesome. And so...
it was important that you got those early good reviews, that it felt right from an outer perspective and an inner perspective, because you said you liked it, but you also got those good reviews. Did that encourage you to move on?
Well, I think probably, I do think that if everyone would have said like, nice try, kid, I may have been, maybe I would have I probably would have had 2 choices at that point, right? I could have either moved on to something else or then doubled down and dug harder and try to learn how to do it better. I don't know. Yeah. But I do remember that people were like, wow, you've really got a knack for this. Because when you're in 5th grade doing a production of Mary Poppins, it has nothing to do with skill, quite honestly. Like in terms of, I ended up, spoiler alert, I ended up doing this in high school, and then I moved to New York City to pursue this, and I went to a musical theater conservatory and like trained and learned technique and all of those things, which I think are really important to somebody who's trying to hone their craft in the performing arts, whatever sort of performing you're doing. And I think that back then it has nothing to do with any of those skills, and it's really just like, do you have a knack for it? Do you have that talent or X factor kind of stuff? Yeah. So I think being told that I was good at it was somewhat encouragement, although I will say that throughout that time in my life, from about 6th grade, when I started wanting to do things or take lessons or things of that nature, on all the way through high school, I was discouraged by all of the people who taught me, who were training me. I was discouraged in terms of them saying to me, hey, Matt, this is not something that you want to do. You're very good. This is not something that you want to do for your life. Being an actor, being a performer like this is a really, really difficult lifestyle. I know many, many really talented people who just couldn't, it's a lot of luck. It's a lot of being in the right place at the right time. And people can be on Broadway and win the Tony Award one year and then the next year be out of work. It's, any other profession that I can think of in the world. It's like, if you do well and you get all these accolades and awards, you're almost guaranteed you're going to work, right? I mean, like if you do a good job and you're really good and you're on the top of your craft, you're probably, I can't think of another profession where it's like, well, sorry, we just don't have a part for you in this show. Too bad. And that's what can happen with actors specifically. And so it's a difficult profession to get into, right? Sorry, we went off on a tangent there. So
no worries.
So I moved to New York. I did that all through high school. Was a performer. And I moved to New York to pursue a career in theater, to go to the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. I graduated from the program, and 3 days later, I was off on tour of the United States in a show. During the last semester at that school, they encourage you to audition because it's usually really hard to get a job. And the first audition that I went on, I actually booked. Now, I didn't know that I booked it.
Yeah, it's rather uncommon, right? It's like first audition.
Extremely uncommon.
Usually people go through a lot of reject and a lot of no's.
Correct. And I did go through my share of no's eventually. And that was actually a no. So I'll tell you the story. So I went out, I auditioned. Great. I also went on many other auditions that week. And I got called back for this, and I think I may have gotten called back for one other show. And so a callback is when they start narrowing the field, and you're sort of in the final, but not really given the role. And I got a call back for this role. I think I auditioned on, let's say, a Monday or a Tuesday, and I had a call back on Thursday or something like that. And I went back. So I had been on several auditions that week, and I did the callback. And the next week I went on more auditions. And then the next week I went on more auditions, and then I finally ended up getting a call, but it was a few weeks after. What happened was they gave the job to somebody else. They hired another person. They made the job offer. The person accepted the job probably like maybe that Friday or Monday or Tuesday, like right after those callbacks had been on Thursday. I sent a postcard. So I had gotten a bunch of headshots, like the 8x10s that you're used to seeing. Yep. And I also took that headshot and put it into a postcard. And so I sent postcards to everybody to follow up with that I had auditioned with. So I think about a week or so after the audition, I sent out this postcard.
Is that a common thing, or is that something where you got your
I don't think so.
Edge?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think... I had heard about this idea. It wasn't like I came up with this ingenious idea. I think I had heard people talk about that as an idea or something like that, but most people don't do it. Like, I'll tell you, I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I don't know anybody, and I knew a lot of actors at the time. I didn't know anybody who had postcards. Not a single person. Yeah. And it's not like they were that expensive. I mean, it's not like I got a whole bunch of them. And it wasn't that much more. The expensive thing was the photo shoot. The reproductions of the photos wasn't that bad, and so I sent that out. And the person who had accepted the job, or maybe they were thinking, I don't know. All I know is they called the director and said, "I'm sorry, but I cannot. I'm not. I'm declining the job. I think they had gotten something else or whatever."
After they already signed.
No, I don't think they had signed a contract. I think they had verbally accepted. Again, I don't know the ins and outs, but I know they gave it to somebody else, and he had said that he was going to do it or something, and then he ended up rescinding, saying, hey, I don't want to, I'm not going to do I guess he got another role or something. I don't know. But what I do know is that on that very day that the guy called and said, hey, I don't want to do it anymore, my postcard arrived in the mail. So they were sitting there and they were like, oh no, this guy's not doing it anymore. And then they get this postcard and they're like, oh yeah, this is one of the guys we were considering for the role. It was like between me and probably like 3 or 4 other guys, right? So they gave it to one of them. And then it could have easily gone to any of the remaining, but my postcard showed up. And so they're like, well, this guy really wants the job. His postcard showed up. So they called me and they offered me the job. And I was like, yeah, I'll take it. So, I mean, it was my first audition. It took several weeks, but it ended up, it was funny that it just kind of happened that way. And so, 3 days after, so I was like doing my final, there was no exams. It was a musical theater conservatory, so it wasn't like a sit-down written exam, but we were doing performances and stuff. And during my final semester there, I was actually, the last few weeks, I was rehearsing during the day instead of auditioning. And because I had gotten a gig and doing the shows and performances and classes and stuff at nighttime. And then literally 3 days after graduation, boom, off on a bus and truck tour around the United States, waking up at some ungodly hour of the morning to go and perform. It was a children's theater tour. So perform in front of, all the third and fourth graders across the United States or whatever age they were. It was definitely not glorious lights, camera, action, but I had a job. I was making money as an actor. I think I made
at least in that
20
sense.
I think I was making $20 a day per diem, so it was not taxed. And then I got a paycheck every 2 weeks, and I think it was like maybe $100 or something like that. That I didn't need to touch. Taxes came out of that, but that I didn't need to touch because I was living off my $20 a day. Because our travel and hotel, I just need $20 to basically feed myself. I didn't. This is a long time ago, not any responsibilities or anything. I turned 21 when I was on that tour. I remember my 21st birthday, we wanted to drink alcohol because I had just turned 21. And I don't remember where we were, but it was somewhere sort of kind of like in the middle of nowhere. There was like no bars or anything, but there was a Chinese restaurant that we went to, and they served Mai Tais. And I had Mai Tais for my 21st birthday. I think I had 2 of them. Yeah.
Well, that's quite a memory, and there has been a lot of inflation since that $20.
Oh, yeah.
Day. So I'm sure it went a lot further. Like today in New York, you get maybe one cocktail.
Oh, yeah. No, this was 1993, 94. So this is quite some time ago.
So, but I think one of the interesting things that you kind of achieved with the postcard, I think it's Tony Robbins who says, it just takes an extra inch to stand out of the crowd. And just, you said the podcast in itself is rather inexpensive, but doing it, that's what makes the distinction. And I mean, obviously the podcast could have, not the podcast, the postcard could have arrived any other day, but it was just that lucky extra inch that you had on that. So I think that also kind of goes to the mindset that you apply. You go that little bit extra. You don't cut it short.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think going that extra mile, and it shows a little bit of persistence, which is something that I think is really important to be successful in real estate and in life. But I think it also goes to sort of standing out from the crowd, and also starting to build a relationship, and I think those relationships, those connections that you make with one another in business and in life are things that are really important.
Yeah. And I guess the same translates into real estate, which is very much a relationship business.
Yeah.
So when you say that the consistency or the persistency is there, is that a crucial part you think is necessary for success overall? Or what are the key pillars you would say after such a long experience in acting with a lot of rejection, going through so many no's? What do you think are the key learnings when it comes to those pillars of success?
I wrote a book called Backstage Guide to Real Estate, and the book really talks about my journey. Oh, there it is. So, and the book goes through my journey and shares with readers the 18 keystone concepts that I learned along my journey. Yeah. And one of those is persistence, right? Julie Andrews is accredited with saying that persistence is failing 19 times and succeeding on the 20th, right? And that is true when it comes to the theater as an actor. Facing all that rejection, but still going, auditioning. And the same is true for real estate. I did real estate as a hobby for 10 years before I decided that I wanted to go full time into multifamily apartment syndication. And we can talk a little bit more about what that entails. I don't know if your listeners understand all of that, but just to tie the bow on it, it took me 2 years of trying to do that full time as an active investor and find my own deal to syndicate. It took me 2 years to get one. And so, if I didn't have that persistence, if I wasn't used to, I think, a lot of that rejection and not letting that stop me, I don't know if I ever would have been successful.
I mean, if I remember correctly, you underwrote over 100 deals before you closed your first deal, right?
That's right.
Which probably rings true to a lot of actors. They probably went through hundreds of auditions before they first got their big yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was super lucky with that first audition. It was the right show that I was like perfect for. And, it just so happened. That could have also been my 100th, It was a little bit of luck of the draw. And you'll see that in real estate. Some guys will be in the business for like a month and they'll get a deal right away. And there is I think there's a little bit of a luck factor there. With that, with being that successful that quickly. Either that or they're grossly overpaying for the property, right? But
either way, it might work.
Yeah, but I mean that it is important to have that persistence and to keep going and have that drive. And I don't think that just goes for theater though, or real estate. I think that's just in life, I mean. Sometimes you don't get handed the easiest path and you have to keep working and working and working at something.
Do you think there is a generational difference? Is there more of that in maybe your generation or previous generations than the newer generations that are growing up right now? Because I see a lot of impatience, especially in social media. People think everything should happen overnight. There's a lot of... maybe even a level of a little bit of entitlement where people just think they deserve. I'm turning 49 today. And so that makes me feel a little bit old, especially if I start... You're not even halfway there. The way where medicine
going
goes,
on a rant about...
halfway.
Kids today, they don't know what they've got. They've got it so easy. I used to have to walk to school every day, uphill both ways, So I do want to temper anything with I say with, I don't know. I will say that I do think that with social media, we're all of us, right, are putting stuff on social media that is nice good news. It's very seldom that someone will post bad news. I mean, I did post last year. My father passed away, and I posted about that. I didn't do it right away, but I ended up posting about it. But I did it because I had some things that I'd learned and things that I wanted to share with my network about my dad. But if I try not to have any bad days, but let's say something happened that I wasn't thrilled about. I'm not like posting on Facebook like, hey, we just lost that deal that we were in best and final for. Like that's not what I'm posting, hey, we just closed on this deal or hey, positive things. And so I think as a person consuming that, right, all you're seeing is all these positive things, and your network is I got a birthday message today from a guy that I was like friends with in middle school. He posted the most hilarious picture of me, by the way, on social media.
I tried to find you in that picture.
From middle school.
I tried to find you, but I couldn't identify you.
I'm all the way on the bottom, all the way to the right. The bottom right, last person with the eyes squinting and hair about the size of my head. It is unbelievable. I was like, well, I don't even remember that picture. It's a horrible picture. It's funny. It's hilarious. I was laughing. I was laughing. But here's the thing. When you are getting and that's a great guy, he's a great guy, but I really wouldn't know what he's up to if it wasn't for social media. I've got thousands of friends, quote unquote, which are people from I haven't talked to since middle school, or people that I met at some real estate conference who sent me a friend thing, and I'm a friendly guy. I'm totally great with having those friends, but you're just being bombarded by all this like, oh, look at me, I did this and I did that and I did that. And I think it does I think there's studies about it, and I can't quote any, and maybe I should learn one so that I can use it as a quote if I ever talk about it again. But, it's like it does lead people to, I think, maybe a feeling of inadequacy or depression, I think, is higher nowadays than what it used to be. And I was depressed as a kid, so, not like clinically, but I didn't have the greatest life. And had a hard time fitting in, especially with that hair back then.
That made it really tough, right?
Oh my gosh. And, you have no idea. And, but I also think, you just kind of see this stuff and I think it does lead to people thinking that, there's all these overnight sensations, like overnight success. My overnight success as a real estate investor, the past year has been unbelievable for me. Guess what? I did it 10 years as a hobby to learn this whole thing. And then I grinded it out making no money for 5 years, right? Before now I'm finally seeing some nice successes, right? And so I think, but then I tell in my book, it gives you the whole story of how it all got. It's not an overnight success. It's something that's taken a really long time. And I think nobody really, I think, in a world of sound bites and quick posts, you just kind of see the final result and not necessarily all the work that went behind it. And so I think that might be, I think that's what you were sort of referring to. That might be skewing people, not just young people, but old people like myself too. I think it might be skewing our perspective on what it takes to actually get somewhere.
Yeah. One of the things that also struck me while I was reading your book is it reminded me a little bit of Steve Jobs' commencement speech where he was referring to connecting the dots in hindsight. I don't think you could have ever predicted your life. While I was reading the book, the way the turns went and how you kind of accidentally were pushed into real estate ownership and how it all developed into multifamily today. And I think... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm 100%. I mean, I never thought that I would get involved in digital marketing, right? I always thought I would be doing theater. And then I was doing theater and started to fall in love with digital, basically with website development. And then I was doing that. And then the dot-com bubble burst in 2001. And my business that I had at that point doing digital marketing was imploding because everyone was going out of business. And then my landlord told me I had to move out of the place I was living in. And I needed to find a place to live. I never would have thought that was going to lead me to being a real estate investor, but it did because I ended up buying a place, selling it 2 years later, quadrupling my initial investment and going, whoa, there's something to this real estate thing. And then that's when I did real estate, as a hobby for 10 years. But that, I never could have predicted that those sequence of events would happen, which I think makes my story kind of interesting and unique. A guy who was an actor and then a digital marketer and then a real estate investor. You're kind of like, how do those three go together?
I think where it goes together is whenever something rings true for yourself is you lean into it fully. I think when I look at the acting journey, what I hear is you move to New York. That's going all in a way. When you were going into the digital marketing, in the book you're writing how you basically locked yourself up for a year and just learned everything you could put together in HTML and all of those languages. And the same, I think, rings true when you refer to your journey in the multifamily space, what you were talking about, basically the podcast university. You just go all in.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very needed trait, because whenever you throw yourself in, I think things start happening, and it's when we dabble that nothing happens, because you need to have that level of intensity and patience at the same time, I think, to make things work. And in the multifamily space, as you just said, after 5 years you got some nice traction, and from a social media perspective it looks like it's almost an overnight success, but it's been in the works for the 10 years in hobby real estate, and then that serious commitment of 5 years putting the head down and grinding it out. So what are you up to lately in the multifamily real estate space? What are your learnings and where are you headed?
Well, we've been putting together I think a nice portfolio over the past few years of good real estate investments and bringing along a bunch of investors. And so I'll loop back around to syndication for anyone who's listening to this podcast and doesn't know what that is, because I did mention it earlier. Syndication is when a bunch of investors can get together and invest in something together as a whole. So, in this case, we're talking specifically about real estate, but it doesn't have to be real estate. You can syndicate many other things, including Broadway shows. So, what happens is, you wouldn't, like, the first deal that I did was a $10 million property. It was 132 units. There was no way that I had, it was a little over $2.6 million for the down payment on the property. I don't have that kind of money. But what I was able to do was get about 40 investors all together. And through that, we were able to pool our money together, but also pool together our experience and our knowledge and our balance sheets to qualify for this loan. And we were all able to reap the benefits. And actually, we sold it eventually and did exceptionally well on it. But we wouldn't have been able, that would have been an unobtainable investment for any of us on our own. Yeah. But if we joined forces together, we could do it. And so we were able to do it and get really great returns. So and I've been continuing to do that. So I've been putting together a nice portfolio of B and C class, mainly on the C side of things, assets in desirable markets throughout the U.S., mainly in the South. And right now, we're kind of seeing how things are going, and we're continuing to look at B and C class properties, but more and more I'm seeing I don't want to get too technical with real estate terms on this podcast, but basically the price, right? The price difference. There used to be a price difference between a higher quality, what we call like an A class asset, versus a B and a C. And so for those of you who speak real estate, we'll call that cap rate, right? But for those of you who don't speak real estate, we'll just call that the value, right? The valuation of these properties. And they used to be sort of spread out, like all the higher class would be more expensive, and then the B class would be, middle of the road, and C class would be less expensive. What's happened, because real estate has gotten so popular in the past few years, is that all of those prices are getting higher, right? The cap rates, it's weird because cap rates work the opposite way. So cap rates go lower. That means prices are going up. So while the prices are going up, and that's to be expected, what's happening is the difference between the A class and the B class and the C class, that spread between them is compressing. So now we're seeing we can buy B class assets is not so much more than a C class asset, or an A class asset is not so much more than a B. And so now we're starting to move more and more into the B space, and we're starting to look at some A class assets now, because we're saying, hey, if we really don't have to pay like that much more, because everyone wants these B's and C's because they have the value add. They have an opportunity to do work on them and make them better and increase their value, but therefore people are paying more and more for them. It's almost might make more sense to buy a Class A property. And even there, hey, maybe it makes sense to build something. Because the price is,
Are you exploring that right now?
We are. Yeah, because when you're looking at the where we were 10 years ago, you could buy something at like a tenth of the cost, like replacement cost, like the cost to build it from scratch. So it's like, oh, of course you're just going to buy something that's already existing. But now at this point, you can build something, that you're not going to have any, hopefully if you built it properly, you're not going to have any problems with deferred maintenance for, the first 10 years at least. It will make your repairs and maintenance budget a lot lower. And if you're getting raw land and without entitlements and then doing entitlements on it, there can be a large lift. And so that's something I've been exploring for a couple of years now. I've been investing passively as a passive investor in ground up development, in some land development where they're buying land and putting entitlements on it. I was very intimately involved in a project like that that a friend of mine who's an architect was running, and I was going to all the different hearings and the zoning board meetings and sort of really getting myself up to speed on how all of this works. I mean, there's obviously more risk involved when you're talking about buying a piece of raw land that doesn't have entitlements. And so entitlements means like the right permitting and zoning and those kinds of things. Because you need to get all of that, and then you need to actually build it. And so you'll have a couple of years with no cash flow, and then you have to fill it up to a certain amount of occupancy, right? What we've been doing is buying stabilized properties that are already 90% occupied. They're already cash flowing. So day one, we close on it. It's a cash flowing asset. Which I will continue to do. But I think strategically getting involved in a Class A or 2 property, maybe getting involved in a new ground up development or 2, is a nice way to round out that portfolio with some things that are looking longer term, especially with what we see going on in the environment. You posted something on LinkedIn the other day that I haven't finished watching completely, but it's by one of my favorite authors, a guy named Ray Dalio, right? Yeah. And it's that awesome video for his new book about the changing world order. But if you listen to what Ray's saying, and I don't want to say he's saying it in the video because I haven't watched the whole video yet, but if you listen to a lot of what he's been talking about lately and what a lot of other people like him who are long-term investors who've been in this business for a long time and have a lot more gray hairs than you and I have, and so they have a lot more experience than us, they think that we're going into an extremely inflationary environment, and that we're already there, actually, especially with the fact that the Fed's been printing a lot of money for a long period of time. The chickens are going to have to come home to roost at some point. We've been kicking the can down the road for a long time now, and I think things are catching up with us. So in an inflationary environment, it's important to have assets that are, like real assets and not, cash in the bank is being eroded by inflation right now at a tremendous rate. I think the federal government has said that it's around 7%. I've also heard people like Ray saying, and I'm not going to attribute this directly to Ray, but just people like that saying, hey, the government the numbers that they're publish is not that they're lying, but they're going to be publishing kind of like the lowest possible inflation because it doesn't look good for the government, but inflation could be high. I mean, that's what they're estimating, right? And so when you look at that inflation number, my understanding is that it doesn't include things like housing and fuel costs and things like that. And if you actually include all of that, it's a lot higher, like 15 to 20% is what it kind of looks like from an estimate perspective. And
I think so too. There is some lifestyle component to this, which is not really reflected in that inflation at all. And it depends. Like if I wanted to buy a house upstate New York right now, and those kind of things are certainly not reflected in it, where the prices have just developed completely differently.
100%. So I mean, I don't really know. I'm not trying to make any predictions or spout out any numbers. I'm just saying this is just things that I'm hearing from people, and so it makes me think, hey, if we're in this inflationary environment, it really makes sense to hold on to assets, something that's going to go up. Like if you talk about that house, if you would have bought it or you buy it now even, and inflation goes up, that house is going to go up. So it will hopefully keep pace with inflation. But if you have money just sitting in the bank, that dollar buys less and less every year, day, month, however you want to look at it. So I think that investing longer term in some of these assets that have a longer horizon is probably a really nice way to round out one's portfolio.
But so far from what I heard, your investors are used to having a certain level of cash flow. So I guess you need to kind of manage the expectations there, because a ground up development, there's pretty much no cash flow for the first couple of years. And then there's a nicer upside at the end, right?
There is. And so, there are basically two types of investors, and I mean there's all kind of spectrums in between, but yeah, there's cash flow investors, which I mainly am. I mean, I talk about in the book how I invest for cash flow, but when I look at what I'm creating for myself and for my investors, people who invest with me, and we partner together on all these things, right? I invest with them. I think of it as a big team. I don't think it is a bad idea for us to have a couple of A-class assets, to have a couple of ground-up developments, especially with where we see the environment today. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do these high cash flow B and C class value adds, because I'm going to still continue to do those, and those are going to be my bread and butter. But I do think, look, if I can get one or two of these either A or ground-up developments in there, along with maybe like 3 or 4 multifamily, just the B and C class value add, if I have that, like maybe 25% of the deals that I'm investing in now are a little bit more longer term, I'm okay with that. And the other thing is, like, honestly, I have built up some good cash flow from those, B and C class value adds. I'll continue to do those, but it may be a good idea to do some of those. And a class A property is not going to have the cash flow that a B or C value add is going to have, because they're just going to cost more. So we might be looking at, a cash on cash. And again, I don't have a deal. I'm not proposing this to anyone. I'm just saying in generalities, we might be looking at something that has, between a 4 to 6% cash on cash return during the hold period, versus on a larger multifamily, on like the value add type of thing, we might be looking at, 8 to 10%. So, but the total return at the end is probably going to be around the same, if not more. And so that's, I think we need to look both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And so these deals that I'm talking about, Class A and ground up, is definitely a more longer-term view.
Yeah. So if I were to meet you, and I consider myself a passive investor, I know you speak about it in the book, but maybe you can speak to it a little bit here now. How do I identify an operator or a syndicator that acts in my best interest? Like when you speak about the ground up development or even a syndication, how do you as an operator protect the downside for the investors? How do you identify the right kind of market along those lines?
So the question you ask really goes to one of the keystone concepts that I share in the book, which is the 3 deal pillars, right? So the 3 deal pillars, as I call them, is the sponsor. So that's the person who's putting together and running the deal. It's the market, and it's the deal itself. And so all 3 of those are extremely important. But if you had to pick one that was the most important, then that would be the sponsor, the person who's running the deal. And what I do in the book, and I'll give you a couple of examples, but over several chapters, is try to tell and give like real life examples of things that have happened to me where I've looked at the deal, the market, and the sponsor, and share the things that I've learned about those through the stories, like real life examples of things that happened. And then at the end of the book, I have a section called the Backstage toolbox, in which it's really there's a portion that's like the last 40 to 50 pages of the book, and there's a section at the very beginning of that. There's 4 sections to that. The first section to that is called quickly sizing up a syndication, and it breaks down those 3 pillars and gives a potential investor 5 questions for each of those pillars, so 15 questions that you might ask yourself or think about when you're looking at a deal. And it also gives you answers. It gives you 3 answers to each question. There's a thumbs up answer, there's a fingers crossed answer, and then there's a thumbs down answer. And so depending on how you answer, if you're answering all of them and they're all thumbs downs, well, that could be a problem. I say this all with a grain of salt because I had a deal that I was looking at. So there's a group of syndicators that I know, and they did a deal, and I invested in it. And the deal did really well, and they were selling it. And it's probably I think it might be the best performing deal I ever invested in. Except for actually, there's this one in Arizona that's doing incredibly well. But at the time so far, and so this one's gone full cycle. It was going full cycle, and they did incredibly well. And they had a new deal, and I was like, all right, send me the info on the new deal. Maybe we'll just kind of reinvest those funds into the new deal. And they sent me the deal, and if I went through sort of, I have kind of like that mental checklist that I've now written down for the book, but I went through sort of that mental checklist, and if I was just evaluating it with the stuff I had in the book, I would have done the deal. I mean, there was problems with the underwriting. There was a lot of problems with the underwriting, and then I got on the phone with them for about a half an hour and went through all my questions, and they answered it, and every answer they did, I was like, oh, okay, that's actually that. I'll buy that reasoning. That makes sense. We've owned it for a year, and they're putting it back on the market for sale. I mean, it just did unbelievably well. These guys, I don't know if they have the golden touch or what, but so far, this is the second deal I'm doing with them. It did really well. So this isn't the be all and end all, but it's there to sort of help people. And so to talk about it, look, when you're looking at the sponsor, you want to know the first question: how did you meet the person? I met them because Hannes told me that he invested in them, and they did really great with him, and he really enjoyed working with them. Well, that's someone I want to meet. That's someone I want to invest with, right?
Yeah.
Another option could be, well, I was at a real estate conference, or I was at a meetup, or I heard him on a podcast or something like that. It sounded like an interesting person, and that's kind of like my fingers crossed one, and then. For the thumbs down answer on that, that's like, someone who sent me spam email or like some random like Facebook Messenger or, LinkedIn Messenger thing. And again, I'll say this, it doesn't mean just because they reached out to you through Facebook Messenger that you shouldn't invest in. They could be, a really good person who's spending money and doing this as sort of a marketing outreach. So I'm not going to say like, don't do a deal like I said with that other deal that I did. There was a bunch of thumbs down, but I ended up doing it. But it's definitely like, hey, word of caution, because when someone's reaching out to you in kind of spammy way, especially if they're like, hey, it's on Facebook and they're like, hey, I got a 506B offering for you, and, blah, 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 with amazing returns, and it's a big red flag because you can't be offering 506B that way, right? It's against the rules. And so they're violating rules right away, which makes me wonder, what other rules are they violating? And are they, I don't know. I worry about, and I warn about people like that in the book, people who are obviously sidestepping the rules that are written by the SEC around capital raising and things like that. And there are rules for it. If people are breaking those rules, then it's kind of like, okay, well, what other rules are they breaking? Like if they're willing to compromise on that, are they willing to compromise on other things? And do I want to give my money to that person? What else are they compromising on? And so those are concerns that I have. And then the other thing is, well, okay, maybe they didn't realize that they were sidestepping the rules. And that makes me even more worried. Like, so they're doing something, they're in a business and they don't even know the rules around it. So, I'm cautious about those kinds of things. So that's like how to look at that's just one way to look at a sponsor. You want to look at their track record. What have they done before? Those kinds of things are important. And then equally, you need to look at the market, make sure that there's growth, that there's population growth and economic growth, and then the fundamentals of the deal itself. And I get into the book about things like, your cap rate, what cap rate you're projecting at the exit, and what kind of rent growth you're anticipating, and expenses, and the way that you're putting your financing together. One of the ways that we're able to get good returns on these is because we're able to put debt on it, right? Leverage mortgages, right? Essentially mortgages. But how is that mortgage structured? Because in the commercial world, there's many different ways, and there's different ways you can structure and put these deals together. And it's not really regulated in terms of like the ways that you can structure them. So people can put together deals that are more risky than others. It doesn't mean that they're not bad. Or not good. It doesn't mean that they're bad, but people should understand the risk that they're getting involved in.
Yeah. But then I remember the first time I actually got my paperwork for a deal, and it's like 20 pages telling me I'm gonna lose my money. So how does a passive investor kind of make that distinction? How do they get to the stage where they can make an educated decision and they don't get scared away by those 20 pages, and they will actually sign the dotted line on a good deal?
Oh, I wish it was only 20 pages,
Yeah.
It's right, because it's like, you're right, there's 20 pages saying, hey, you can lose money this way, you can lose that money that way. That's part of that, the PPM, the private placement memorandum. But then there's all those other pages of legal, a lot of times these are anywhere from 50 to closer to 100 pages of legal documentation that an investor needs to sign. And so you answered your question within your question, because you said the word educated, and that's really what it's about. I mean, as a passive investor, I wrote a blog piece about this, a bunch of blogs on my website, and I wrote a blog piece about passive investing, and it's billed as this kind of like make money while you sleep, and you can make money while you sleep, and so that is good, but it is not like no money, no experience, no problem, no credit, whatever. You don't actually need to have credit, but you do need to have money to invest in these deals first and foremost. But secondly, you really need to be educated. So I really think that people who want to invest passively need to spend a little bit of time getting educated, and then they'll be able to vet sponsors and deals quickly. And once you've vetted a sponsor, so once you've got the education and you've vetted the sponsor, then it's like, okay, anytime you get something from that sponsor, you take 20 minutes, look at the deal, 30 minutes, look at the deal, and then it's an easy yes or no, right? Because you've already done the homework. But you need to do the homework by listening to podcasts such as yours, by reading books such as mine.
Such as
right?
yours.
I'm not saying that my book is the be all and end all. I'm not saying that your podcast is the only resource too, but I'm just saying things like that, right? Yeah. Where you can get educated and understand how to look at these deals, how to, peel. I mean, my book, Backstage Guide, the cover is like a curtain being pulled back, right?
Yeah,
and
I can you
need to be able, you need to be able to pull back that curtain and see the mechanics of what's going on, behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, So you need to be able to see the mechanics that are going on to understand whether a deal makes sense or not. And so I think there are podcasts, and I think more specifically there are books that get into that. And I try to do that in a way that's easy there's a lot of humor and story in there to make it easy for people to read. It's not just like a technical textbook. And there's good technical textbooks out there. So people can kind of understand what they're getting into. I think that's really important. And then it can be passive because, then you vet the person, and then it's like you look at their deals, and when they have a deal that looks right to you and you have the money, you deploy it. And then you don't do anything. You really can't do anything. And that's part of what the legal documents that you're talking about show. It's like you're a limited partner in these deals. So once you've written that check for $50K or $100K or $500K, whatever that number is, it's gone. And you got to hope that the person you've given it to is going to have it come back and hopefully bring a lot of friends with it, right? You want it to come back with more than just one. More than just what you put out, right?
Couple babies coming back there.
Yeah, and that's what you hope, right? So, and that's what should happen if you've picked a good operator, right? And you've picked a good deal in a good market, then it should. There's no guarantee, and that's what that private placement memorandum is saying. Is like, hey, there's no guarantees. A lot of things can happen that would make this go wrong. There's risk involved in any investment. There's also risk involved with walking out the door in the morning. God forbid you could get hit by a car. Everything in life has risks to it, and so you need to be clear with investors what those risks are. And as an investor, you have to realize that, hey, I'm giving this $50,000. I'm hoping it's going to come back as 100, but I could lose it all. Like it could all. The odds of it all going away are probably very are not very great, but it still is a possibility. And if you're going to not be able to pay your mortgage or put food on the table because that $50,000 is gone, then you should not invest that $50,000.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whatever is being invested shouldn't pay for your livelihood normally. And also, I think in the initial stage of the first couple investments, that cash flow that should come should not be calculated in for your food expenses.
I agree. I know people who want to do sort of like an arbitrage play, which is like where what they're trying to do is borrow money from their HELOC, okay, or some other line of credit that they might have, and invest it in a deal. And I had a friend of mine who wanted to do that. And the guy, he's financially secure. He's got a very good business. And he was like, oh, yeah, well, I'm just going to borrow from my business line of credit, $50K, and then put it in on yours. And I said, don't invest in the deal. And he's like, why not? I'm like, well, because, and I wasn't just saying this because it was my friend. I would say this to anybody. We're hoping that we're going to have cash on cash returns of like 9 or 10%. I don't remember what it was for the deal. And his line of credit, it was like 6% or 7%, something like that. So he's like, I'll have that spread. But even if it was only 1%, like there's that spread. But I'm like, dude, I cannot guarantee you that you're going to get that cash flow. Like we could be in a position where we're not able to do distributions. Maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year, maybe for the entire life of the deal. Like we believe that we will, but if you've got to pay some creditor something, like the bank or whoever's giving you that line of credit, they're not going to be like, it's cool, we understand that your real estate investment's not paying out right now. No, you're gonna have to pay them, so you have to pay that out of pocket. So I don't think this is the right kind of investment for you, to be borrowing from one thing to try to do an arbitrage play. So he didn't do that, but then the next deal he had saved up $50K and put that in the deal. It's all good,
Yeah. So what do you think does it take from a person that's getting started in terms of the mindset to become an investor? Because one of the things that struck me, like when I started educating myself financially, is that it's actually all available. And in fact, the government has different schemes. For example, a Roth IRA, that a person with an average income at the end of their working life cycle can become a millionaire. But why does the majority of people choose not to do that? Or what does it take to actually go that direction?
I don't think that people are choosing not to do it. I think that people aren't choosing to do it. And I think it's very clear why a lot of people are choosing not to do it. It's because they don't know about it. There's that old saying, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. Right? There's a lot of things that you don't know about. You just don't know that you don't know about them because you don't even know they exist. They're not even in your frame of reference, right? So, I'm trying to think of an example, but if, like before you even knew about cap rates, right? Before you had even heard about cap rates, if I would have told you something like, there's these things called cap rates, like you didn't even know. You didn't know that you didn't know about them until someone told you there was cap rates, and then you were like, I don't know what those are, and then you learned about them, right? So I think that there's a lot of people who don't know about passive real estate investments and real estate as a wealth building tool. I will give you an example. I did a thing, and I wrote a chapter in my book, and it's called The Accidental House Hack. What I did was I did a house hack. They talk about that in real estate circles all the time, these house hacks. Well, guess what? I didn't know there was a thing called a house hack. So I did it. I didn't know. I didn't know it was a thing. The numbers seemed to make sense, and I did it. And then I found out years later, that's called a house hack, right? But I didn't know that there was such a thing. And so I also didn't know. Well, one of the things that I talk about in the book is I built a house. from scratch, and I did that in 2009, and right coming out of sort of the Great Recession, thinking, oh, I'm brilliant because I'm building something, and material costs are probably low and labor is probably low, right? What I didn't realize, what I didn't know, because I didn't know this, was that I could have bought property for like a fraction of the replacement value, for like pennies on the dime, already built existing property somewhere else. But I didn't even know. I didn't know that I could buy a turnkey single family house. I didn't know that there was real estate syndications where I could join other investors and have an experienced person lead that. I mean, had I known all of that earlier, I would have done it earlier. I'd be, a gazillionaire now, right? But I didn't know about those things. And so, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a book that got me very hooked into creating passive income. And a lot of people who are in real estate really like that book. And, when you listen to Robert Kiyosaki, the author of the book, he talks about in the book that, there's not a lot of financial education in the U.S. And so it's just a lot of stuff that people don't know about. And I think that if more people knew about these things, then they may or may not be inclined to invest in them. If you want to talk about, millennials and Gen Y, whatever, the younger people that you were talking about earlier, and why are they not saving or investing in real estate? I think more and more of them are, first off. But I think that a lot of them saw in the Great Recession their parents being drastically affected by this, by the Great Recession. They saw people, either their parents or friends, or just on the news, people losing their homes. They saw people's, 401ks and other retirement savings plans. And by the way, I'm not condoning those, because I think some of them are good, some of them are not great, and it depends on a lot of different factors. I'm not saying one thing one way or another, but they're not all great for everybody in every situation. But a lot of people saw all of that sort of get eroded for people who were in retirement or getting close to retirement age. And it gave them a really bad taste in their mouth. And they're like, what? I'm not going to do that. So I think that is maybe why some of it is just, an instant gratification society where people want things right now and don't necessarily save for the future and don't necessarily put money away. And look, I think a 401k, if you listen to people like Tom Wheelwright, he'll tell you it's a terrible investment vehicle. And because he's looking at it from a tax perspective, and I don't disagree with him. I actually think he makes extremely, I love Tom Wheelwright. I think he's great. But what I will say is that a 401k at somebody's work, where they're going ahead and signing up to put a certain amount of money away, and sometimes the company's matching it, can be a good thing for someone who's not going to have the discipline to save the money. For me, back in the day, I did put money in a 401k because I was like, hey, listen, if it's my paycheck, it gets into my bank account, I'm going to spend it. Right? I'm not going to then be like, oh, I'm going to be disciplined enough to take $100 or $1,000, whatever the number is, every month and move it into my savings account. Yeah. Eventually, I got to the point where I had that discipline, but especially in the earlier years. So having almost like a forced savings, and then my employer was matching in many cases over the years, it gave me a little bit of a nest egg, which I then moved into self-directed and I used to invest in real estate, but that I built that up over time through that almost forced savings. Now, honestly, it wasn't necessarily the best thing. Investing in real estate through that vehicle, through a self-directed, is not the most tax advantaged thing to do. I've actually gotten rid of some of that and restructured, and that's a whole other topic for another conversation.
Yeah,
but
that's a deep dive.
Yeah, but. So I think people aren't doing it for those two reasons. Sorry, I kind of spoke a lot there.
No worries. I mean, for me, it's just very interesting. Like when I read The Richest Man in Babylon, which the book is 100 years old, and it's like, I think it's in English, it's not even 96 pages, or it's just 96 pages. And I'm like, this is the stuff I should read once a year in school till I leave high school or wherever, college, because it's so simple. I mean, you can literally read it in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
But I felt like, I mean, I grew up in Germany. I wasn't really exposed to anything along those lines, more so in the US. But from what I hear you saying, it's not so much in the educational system overall, right?
Oh, it's not. It is not.
Yeah.
Like, it would be great, I think, if there was like a class in high school or maybe even in a younger age, but definitely in high school that was like, look, you've got. Okay, first. I almost regret, I'm probably going to almost regret saying this because I was such a fan of the arts, but like there are electives like music, there's, graphic art, there is, all these other things that you can take. But I don't even think it should be an elective, honestly. I think there should be a requirement of like a course. Yeah. Maybe it's one semester, but just like the basics of finance, I mean, that just doesn't exist in a lot of places. In a lot of places, sometimes they have a bit. I ended up taking a class. I did take a class that was like an entrepreneur. I don't know, because I remember we did a whole class and we had to like sell a product and blah 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 blah. I don't remember what that was, and that was good and it taught some basic business concepts. But it wasn't about like investing and what to do with your money and money management and stuff like that. It was more about businesses. They had us do a thing where we assembled pens and we learned about like assembly lines and how you can do things quicker in an assembly line. It was that those kinds of things, which was good, but still more oriented towards like large business and not towards the individual, towards entrepreneurism, towards investing or being a business owner.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit lacking. It wasn't really exposed in school. I think general school of thought there is not going that direction, and I think we've seen the same in Europe as here. It's a bit unfortunate. So, would you say that real estate, what you're doing right now, is more work or pleasure? Because I think that you seem very enjoyable when I see you going around, and I know you're a very deep worker. You have like that project management mode with your Excel sheets where you're very diligent, but at the same time I think you have a very good balance when it comes to it.
I am a PMI certified project management professional, and so that means I'm really good at managing people, projects, and timelines. And so that's one of the reasons why I think from an operational standpoint, our real estate investments are successful. And so that's good, but more than that, I really enjoy talking. I enjoy that. I do like that. But I more than that enjoy talking with people, meeting with investors, and helping set them on a path to produce passive income so that they can write their own story. I know that's the subtitle of my book, but it's there's a reason why, right?
Yeah, I mean, it rings true to you. That's why you put it in the book, right?
Well, yeah, and so I want people to be able to produce that passive income, and so I enjoy talking with people about that stuff. I enjoy meeting new people, hearing their stories, and figuring out where I might be able to help them. And so, wherever they are on that real estate journey, if they're looking to just produce passive income or they want to syndicate deals or whatever, I love helping people and talking with people and learning about people. So yeah, man, I love my job. It's great. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm retired. You know what I mean? Like, really, it's like, because what do they say? It's like, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I have a job. I don't have really a 9 to 5 where I have to be, I have work that I need to have done. I have responsibilities and obligations, but I also have the flexibility to shift that a little bit if I need to. A couple of weeks ago, we went on a trip and I had some work that I needed to get done, but I was able to just bring my laptop and get the work done, but still be able to go on the trip and enjoy myself and spend time with my family. And I want to be able to give that the sort of freedom and flexibility that I have. I'd like other people to have that as well, because I think ultimately, the last tagline of the book, so it's produce passive income, write your own story, but the last tagline last part of that subtitle is the most important, and it's and direct your dollars toward positive change.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm trying to do in the apartments and the communities that we manage, is really create win-win situations where it's a really good environment for the people to live in, where they can have affordable, good quality homes to live in. I'm all about reinventing property ownership as a positive for communities instead of this sort of negative image of the landlord that's pervasive right now in media, because there are a lot of people out there who can do good, but also beyond that, taking my investment dollars and trying to do other things that are positive in the world. And so part of that for me is my involvement in the theatrical arts and trying to be a part of art that also can help bolster societal change, expose people to different viewpoints that they maybe have not considered, right? Those are things that are important to me. Also charitable giving. And I think that as people get to a point where they don't have to worry necessarily about their bills and putting food on the table, I think generally most people start to gravitate towards things that are creating positive change in their own way, in their own communities. And I think that makes the world a better place. And so that's why, again, I don't have a charity. I'm not curing cancer. I'm not, but I think you can be an ethical business person and do well by doing good. And the bottom line doesn't just have to be about the dollar. And, I have a friend who's a passive real estate investor, and he really loves animals. And he's gotten to a point now where he's got a bunch of passive income coming in, and he now spends a lot of time donating time and funds to like animal type thing. Now, I'm not a big animal person. I mean, I like animals, but but he's like an animal lover, and he's helping animals, And so you can do those kinds of things, whatever that positive change is for you, whatever warms your heart and gets you excited, you can do. And I bet yours is probably like teaching everybody yoga or something like that.
That's correct. Really that's what this whole journey from the podcast is also about, to really connect the dots between well-being and wealth generation, because I think that's true wealth is having both and having the understanding what health and well-being means, while also having the freedom to explore what rings true to ourselves. I think that's very much it. Yeah. So that I think that's one of the reasons I connected so well with you over the years, is because, I've always perceived you as somebody who just cares, and has that level of integrity and values that very much align with my own. So thank you so much for making the time on your birthday, such a special day, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Speaking with me, this was a pleasure and thanks for sharing your ocean of knowledge. And for everybody who wants to know more about Matt, the Backstage Guide to Real Estate, it's a great book. It's entertaining and educational at the same time. I highly encourage you to dive into it. And Matt, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so the book, my blog, the newsletter that we have, it's all available on Picheny.com. And I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, but I'll just spell it real quick. It's P like in Peter, ICHENY.com. Just go there. Everything's there to check out and see what it's all about.
Awesome. Thank you very much again, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.